Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the last event in this incarnation of our series, Business Bootcamps for Writers. Today, we're here to discuss finding your writing community. We've covered a variety of topics in this Business Bootcamp series, starting with basics like finding an agent, getting published, and you can view recordings of any that you've missed on our website under events or on our YouTube channel. Today, we're going to hear advice and wisdom from 5 authors about moving forward in your career by getting engaged in your writing community. This series is brought to you by the Authors Guild Foundation with support from the National Endowment for the Arts and Penguin Random House. Thank you to them. And this panel was assembled in collaboration with Broadleaf Writers Association, the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, and the Institute of American Indian Arts. Thank you to all our sponsors and partner organizations for helping shape this content around what writers want. This is great stuff. Glad to be here. To the audience, thank you for sending in questions. It really helps shapes the content as well. You can use the Q&A box below if anything comes up, and we'll get to some questions toward the end. And there's automatic closed captioning under the subtitles button if you'd like. But now I'm happy to step away and turn it over to Zachary Steele, our moderator for today. Zach's the author of 3 novels, including his latest, The Weight of Ashes. He's been featured in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Publishers Weekly, Writers Magazine, and Shelf Awareness, among other places. And currently he's hard at work on a new novel due out next year and the first in a fantasy series. So exciting stuff. Zach and our panelists, thank you for being here and have fun.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, obviously. And as Johnny said, my name is Zachary Steele, and I am the founder and executive director of Broadleaf Writers out of Atlanta, Georgia. And I am the author of 3 novels, the most recent of which, The Weight of Ashes, that Johnny mentioned, has actually earned me a nomination for the 2021 Georgia Author of the Year, which is very exciting, and I'm happy about that. I'm thrilled to lead the discussion today, and I'd be remiss not to extend my own personal thank yous. First to you, our attendees who are here, to the Authors Guild for putting this program up, and of course to our panelists. And that's 3 parts, all of them as important as the other. Without any one of those, there wouldn't be a program today, which is an important thing to note, because writing is an exercise in isolation. You work alone, you live in your head, you make friends and family members that don't exist, then you go about ruining their lives so you can work to make them better, if they survive, that is. Learning about the craft, about storytelling, is obviously important, but you need more. This isn't a journey you can make alone. You need your tribe. You need your people. Being an active part of a writing community is vital to a writer. So today, we're going to discuss how you can find a writing community, what that means to you as a writer, and why attending conferences and programs are so important to your journey. But first, allow me to introduce my fellow panelists. Otherwise, I would just be sitting up here rambling on my own. Claudia Lovemeyer is the author of 11 books. At the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, she's the coordinator of the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative, a free learning initiative designed to elevate and celebrate Kentucky Black voices at every level. Claudia lives and works in Lexington, Kentucky. Our next panelist, Sarah Glenn Marsh, is the author of several young adult novels, including the Reign of the Fallen series, and children's picture books, including Anita's Big World, an Amazon Best Book of 2019, and the Junior Library Guild selected Dragon Bones, the Fantastic Fossil Discoveries of Mary Anning. She lives in Richmond, Virginia. Our next panelist is Deborah Taffa. She is the director of the MFA Creative Writing Program at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She won the Penn Gene Stein Grant for her memoir, Whiskey Tender, which is forthcoming from Harper in 2023. She is from the Quechan Nation in Laguna Pueblo and earned her nonfiction MFA in Iowa City. And our final panelist is Julian Winters, who is the author of the IBPA Benjamin Franklin Gold Award winning Running with Lions, the Junior Library Guild selections How to Be Remy Cameron and The Summer of Everything, and Right Where I Left You. A self-proclaimed comic book geek, Julian currently lives outside of Atlanta. So welcome to you all. And we're going to jump right into it because we have a limited amount of time and many questions that we have and many questions that have been submitted already from attendees and that will be submitted through the way. So I'm going to launch into the first question with Claudia and Deborah specifically. You were both part of a writing organization, running part of a writing organization. And I'm curious, how long have you been in your position and what motivated you to take that particular job? And Claudia, we'll start with you.
I've been with Carnegie Center's Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative. We started in 2020, at the end of 2020. I was really impressed that Carnegie Center had a Black Lives Matter statement, and a lot was going on that summer with the protest around the death of George Floyd and our own Kentuckian Breonna Taylor. So it was really impressive to me that they had started an initiative. In the community, I really wasn't very plugged in and into the Carnegie Center and their offerings, because most of my time here in Lexington, I was not doing a lot of writing work. And I think we all know that writing work you don't always get those big advances. So a lot of times I couldn't afford to take any classes. Most of the time, I couldn't afford to take classes at the Carnegie Center or anywhere else. So I just wanted to be able to support people like me who had the economic disparities, the publishing disparities, the educational disparities that we find in the Black community. And here was a dream job that enabled me to help people take these classes for free, not just writing classes, but language classes as well.
I identify so much with what you say, Claudia, about wanting to help people that are in a position that you remember being in yourself. I would start by saying that the Institute of American Indian Arts has always been, it's loomed very large in my mind. I grew up in New Mexico. It's the birthplace of Native contemporary art, which means that it's a place where people have the opportunity to break free of traditions and kind of expand on traditions in unique ways that fit individuals, that give us our stories and the things that we create. It gives us some sovereignty in those realms. And I was so sad that it came into existence, this MFA creative writing program, in my final year in Iowa City. And I was like, oh, I missed out, because it's such a great group of writers that have come out of here already. And we're just nearing our 10th anniversary. I would say that the pandemic brought me here. You know, there was a shifting. I was living in the Midwest. I had lived away from New Mexico for 20 years, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis. And everything was thrown into relief for me during that year and a half when I was at home writing and teaching online. I just started to feel a real longing for my ancestral lands. It felt like suddenly a clock was ticking and it was just time. And in fact, I told my family, I said, I think I need to go home. I'm not happy here anymore in the Midwest. And about a month later, I saw the job listing come through my Twitter feed, and I had this feeling. I just knew. I said, that's my job. I knew immediately. And I applied, and within a couple of weeks, they told me they offered it to me. And within another 2 weeks, I moved out here. So I've only been here since October, and just thrilled to be home and at the Institute.
Excellent. We'll move from that into a question to all of you, and I'll hit with Sarah first, you, and then Julian. But you're all involved in local writing communities in one capacity or other, obviously as a speaker, as an author, as an organizer. And I'm curious as to what you have gained the most from this involvement. And we'll start with you, Sarah.
All right, that's a great question. Because I tend to view like a lot of those opportunities as like giving back to the community that's like given a lot to me. And I view it as like a chance to inspire and encourage other writers at different stages of their journeys. But I would say the thing that it's given to me so much, so many new author friends and connections, and obviously that's invaluable. Actually, Zach, that's how you and I met, probably several years ago now, at a writers conference, right? So, I think I've just been able to meet so many people from different areas of the publishing field by being an active member of my local writing community. And that's priceless to me, to like find that sense of camaraderie so close to home. Obviously now it's obviously, you know, you can find that virtually as well, but having that close to home is a really special thing.
Really?
Yeah, oh gosh, I think back to what you said about so much of writing is such an isolated experience. And for me, especially when I came into publishing, it was very much isolated. I knew nothing. If Google couldn't provide an answer, I didn't have it. So getting involved in the writing community in Atlanta was huge for me. One, because yes, it gave me access to other authors who were pursuing the same thing I am, and at different stages too. Some well established, some new, some in the middle of the road kind of thing. And so that really helped to kind of understand, instead of just like on social media where I just see all the glamorous things, and these are the things that I want to attain, and these are the things I want to get to, and it's actually understanding like the meat of publishing and whatnot. It's super helpful to me. But also as a marginalized person, it was huge because I'm so used to going into things and the door being closed before I even reach it. It's not accessible to me. It's already like, we have our one inside already. So you just kind of have to wait outside until they leave and that space is available for you kind of thing. And getting inside the with other authors and the writing community kind of showed me that no, that's not how it has to be. And I can do things that other people haven't been able to do, which is to open the doors and leave them open, like jam my body right there and say, no, you and you and you come in. So I've also, like Sarah said, been able to give back to so many new and up and coming writers, and even just young writers who are just, they're still in school and they're still trying to figure it all out, and just being accessible to them and whatnot, and say, hey, yeah, let's talk about these things. I see them at events. I see them at different, like writing meetups and whatnot. Just talking with them has been super helpful, because not only gives me the opportunity to give back, but it also gives me the opportunity to remember like grassroots where I started and what that's like, and never to forget that hunger for knowledge and whatnot. So I think that's what's been beneficial to me.
Excellent. Claudia and Deborah, you both have the organizer and the author side of this as well. And I'm curious what you have gained the most from either or both, really. Claudia, why don't you start with that?
From my job as the coordinator of the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative, I think what I gained the most was hearing all of these expressions of gratitude from Black writers who now have this aspect of Carnegie Center and actually the whole literary community in Kentucky to say, okay, now I'm seen. Now, I haven't been erased from these white spaces in the literary community. I also, actually, white writers have also come to me and people in the community to say, hey, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very, very important. So I love that. I love making connections with the larger literary community. We have partnerships with like the Lexington Writers Room, Louisville Literary Arts, just opening people up to opportunities that they haven't had, or these organizations wanted, but they just did not know how to go about finding people of color and inviting them in. And so I'm really grateful that we are now not just invited to the table, we have a table. It is our table. So yeah, that and it just makes me more passionate about what I'm doing.
Love that. Thank you.
Oh, that's very nice. I think personally, I have gained confidence. I think that a lot of times when you're first starting out writing, you feel the pressure of representation, the pressure of wanting to create change. You have big dreams and it feels like you're burdening them all by yourself. And, coming into a group of writers that you can support and there's mutual support and there's like a reciprocity in your successes, you cheer them on. That for me is a huge gift of being in this community. It takes some of the weight and the burden off my shoulder. I think sometimes we think of publishing as this place with a scarcity mentality. You know, we're thinking, well, you know, I don't know how. I always tell my students to think completely the opposite, to cheer each other on, because it affirms your love of the art. And that's why we're all here, because we love literature. And so when I see other people who are publishing and succeeding, I think this is, you know, who come from backgrounds similar to mine, I think how wonderful. We need narratives and counter narratives. We need a whole bunch of stories, because we have never had those books historically. And I remember all too well what it was like to be a young kid and not have access to books that represented or mirrored my experience in the world. So I would say being a good literary citizen in a community or in an organization, reading each other's books, reviewing each other's books, volunteering to read the slush pile for magazines that are publishing people like you. It's a really healthy thing to do that in a very quiet way boosts your confidence about belonging.
Yeah, I would have to absolutely agree with that. Actually, all of you made very wonderful and valid points. I know for myself, like Broadleaf Writers exists because of my experience with the writing community in Richmond and everything that James River Writers offered. And I loved it so much that I wanted to have that myself. And so, you know, it created Broadleaf as an opportunity for writers to come together and that come out of that isolation and not just benefit from the education and the inspiration, but to assist and to help and to pay it forward when they get it. Because a thriving writing community working together absolutely helps every single writer involved. We have a lot of questions that were submitted ahead of time, and you all are throwing some questions up there now, and we're going to do everything we can to get to those, because your questions are right up at the top of the list as the most important today. The first one that I actually have here that's from one of our attendees is, how do I find a writing group or a genre-specific writing group to join? And should you find a group in the same genre or with mixed genres? I will open the floor to whoever wants to take that one.
I recommend, I'm sorry, go ahead,
No,
Julian.
no, Claudia, go ahead. Go. I didn't want it just to be sitting there.
Yeah, that quiet made me uncomfortable. I really suggest that that people, first of all, 2020 changed us all, and it opened up Zoom to more than just business meetings. So now you can find writer classes and writer groups right online who have Zoom classes. There are so many ways now to find a writing community that weren't there before. And of course, look at your local literary nonprofits and see what they offer. I know Carnegie Center has writing groups. I do recommend that writers have groups or belong to groups that are multiple genres. There are so many different things that you can learn from other forms, and the valuable feedback, you know, a poet can give to a fiction writer. Yes, so I do recommend looking online, looking at the local literary agencies, and of course going to conferences, because you can meet all kinds of people at conferences and find your people.
We're certainly going to dig into that. Julian, what was your point?
It's because me and Claudia were on the same wavelength, because it was a lot of what she just said, which is, yes, I highly recommend tapping people from multiple genres in your writing groups. Like Claudia said, you learn so much from all the different genres, all the different styles, all the different mediums that can help improve your writing or help you to see the things that you were thinking about, the ways you want to tell a story differently. I think that's such a valuable thing to have. For me, before pandemic times, a lot of it was going to your local bookstore. What events are they hosting? Who's there? You'll find at local bookstores that a lot of the writing community shows up. They show up for someone's book release or events and whatnot, and that's where the conversations start. That's where things happen. You know, that's when you start planning out meetups and different things like that. So that's super helpful. Like Claudia said, online has been wonderful. Hashtags on social media, I highly recommend following different ones like Writing Community, hashtag am writing, things like that, because the more you dive into it, the more you'll find people locally or even just online. I am a part of several different writing communities through Slack, through Discord, through multiple apps. Like my phone can't take it anymore, but it's just different ways for me to connect with people. And so, yeah, I think there are ways in person and ways online that can be super helpful to you.
Yeah, it's interesting that you know, the genre part of it, you all both answered very, very well. That you kind of touched on another question that we're gonna go with here. But the question was, I crave face-to-face interaction, but live in a rural area. Would it be worth the time and expense to join a remote group? And yes, because now it's so accessible. You know, it's not the way that it used to be, and it's become way more accepted. Programs like this are way more accepted. Writing groups are very active in an online and a virtual capacity. So, I mean, even conferences that are going back to in person are starting to incorporate hybrid elements. So you no longer have the need to be in person, though we will all recommend that you get up off your butts every once in a while and go find some of your people and get together, and you won't regret it, because the energy you get off of that is fantastic. We'll move to a question for everybody. Every writer's journey to publication is it involves a lot of input and inspiration and assistance from other writers. And I'm curious who the individual or individuals were that helped you along your way, and how did you meet them? And Deborah, let's start with you.
So this dovetails nicely with the last question, because I think that sometimes when we think of writer communities, we think of the authors who we love to read. We think of like people who have achieved a level of success in the field that is so far out there. And really, you can look into your local area and find events that have authors both big and possibly small. One of the first places I ever went where I felt that inspiration was the Taoist Poetry Circus, which was run, I think a lot of people have forgotten it. It was run in the 90s. It was they set up a boxing ring, and they brought in two poets who battled with their words. And at a certain point, Sherman Alexie came and fought in the ring and held the title for a very long time. And it kind of started to grow after that. And one of the first writers that who I workshopped with, who told me, "Oh, you're going to have a beautiful voice," was Entisaki Shange, which was she's such a big name, and she's such a she was such a beautiful soul. When I moved out to St. Louis, we lived in St. Louis, I was talked into going to Iowa City for their Summer Writers Festival by a group of just neighborhood women, just women that wanted to get together. And I think we started as a reading group. And from there, we started bringing things to workshop. And by the end of our time together, I was the one workshopping every week because everybody else was too busy to produce. But they took me with them to Iowa City, and I couldn't afford to get a dorm by myself. So I just was matched with a stranger, and I ended up with a very liberal nun who had a Bible where all the words were she rather than he. Forgot. It was just a very sweet thing. And I met an author named Sandra Schofield, who had a lot of regional success writing in Oregon. I think she has like 6 or 7 books. And we became fast friends, and she became a mentor who eventually convinced me to go back to school to get my MFA. And so I entered, for those of you who are older, I entered into this whole writing thing, other than publishing some poems early on. I entered into it relatively like a late bloomer, you know, and that's the wonderful thing about writing, I think, is like your interiority becomes richer as you age. And it's one of the things that you can do, I feel like, that you can start later in life that will feed and sustain you more than you might imagine. And the last thing I would say about that is if you do go to festivals or you do drop into these local events like I'm talking about, for me, I didn't travel far, but I went. Make an effort to make connections, like making the connection. I remember that in the course that I had with Sandra Schofield, I was a little bit shy, but then I left after and I saw her eating soup in an empty little cafe that I had gone in to grab something too. And she looked up and saw me and I waved and she called me over, and that changed everything, like having the courage to one-on-one connect with someone. And clearly you can't connect with everyone, but you will find your people if you're out there taking the risk and being vulnerable and trying.
Singer, what about you?
So, exactly what Deborah was saying about sort of having the courage to make those connections. I met some of the people who helped me on my publication journey in a big way through being a reader and a fan. So attending, as Julian said, events at local bookstores was really key for me. I really enjoyed Jodi Meadows. She's another YA author. She has a lot of fantasy books. Her first series, Incarnate, she was doing a book signing at a local bookstore, and I thought, oh, well, I'll head down there. I listened to her talk beforehand, loved what she had to say, and at the end of the event, I don't know like what possessed me, but it was that courage element, and I asked her to coffee. I was like, we seem like we have a lot in common. Do you want to hang out? And she was like, sure, I'll get coffee with you. Here I am. I was an unagented, unpublished writer, and she was like, yeah, we'll get coffee. So we did, and we became great friends. And she wound up meeting with me a bunch of times for lunches and coffees and providing me with a lot of really invaluable guidance as I started to navigate the agenting process, as I navigated just the publishing process in general. Once I had a deal, she was always there for me to ask the sort of questions that we don't often talk about as writers. And so having that one-on-one support and being able to get frank answers from someone who's been there was really helpful to me, because I could Google it, and it was something I really didn't know about. And then online, so not in a local bookstore, but online, author Susan Denard, she's another young adult author, fantasy author, Truth Witch, amazing, was another big help and inspiration. I met her online through entering a writing contest, hoping to get an agent with the ghost story I'd written. And it was just one of those, again, things where we happened to connect, and she connected with my writing, and she took time, instead of just writing me the couple of lines of feedback that were promised from this writing contest, a whole edit letter that helped me reshape the book and get my first agent. And I've gotten to meet her in person since and thank her for that. And it's just, something I've tried to pass on, and I've since helped other authors on their journeys, and it feels really good to carry that on. So
excellent. Claudia, what about you?
I started my writing journey when I was 40 years old, way back in the day. I'm a lot older than 40 now, but way back in the day when we were blogging. This was pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter. So there was the Christian fiction community, which I was a part of when I started. It was very small, first of all, at least small in the publishing world. So there were people with blogs and, editors that had blogs. And I was visiting one called Faith in Fiction with an editor named Dave Long. And he had a list on the blog of links of other writers' blogs. And so I started my own blog. I contacted someone who I felt her work was the kind of work that I wanted to do. And so, I clicked on her blog. I found her email address. I wrote to her, and, we just became friends because we did have a lot of personal similarities. And because Christian fiction at that time was, probably still is, very, very white, I reached out to the other three literally Black people that were writing CBA, which is Christian Booksellers Association, Christian fiction. And we all became friends and supported each other. This included Sharon Yule Foster and Marilyn Griffiths and Angela Benson. And so it was this really small world. So it was really easy for us to connect with each other. And then every year there was a CBA conference, like the ABA. There was a CBA conference and we would go to it, and our publishers were giving our books away. And that was another way for us to connect with each other.
Mr. Winters.
If there's one thing I think I am, I guess, good/bad at, it is fanboying over an author. So I am one of those people who has no problem word vomiting how much I love an author and their works and the things that they've done. So my first, the people who've kind of like helped my journey were online. I remember there's an author named Jude Sierra who was at the publisher that I really wanted to get published by, which was Interlude Press. And I just slid into her DMs and just spewed about how much I loved her last book, and I just outlined every portion of it that I loved. And she was so generous, and she was so kind, and she didn't block me. And she, she was just like, "Oh, tell me about the stories you're writing, whatnot." And she read over my first 3 books. Each one in the different stages of publishing, and was so helpful, always gave great critiques and ideas, and was also reciprocative of fanning over my work. So that was very helpful to me to really establish the ability to communicate with other authors in a more civilized way. But also that, just that camaraderie of, I love what you're doing and this is what I'd love to kind of do thing. And it kind of went over to another author by the name of Adib Karam, who was debuting the same year as me. He wrote Darius the Great Is Not Okay, which is a phenomenal book. And I just remember saying how excited I was about his book, and he was excited about my book, and we started communicating. And since then, he has invited me to different conferences. He has got me with him to different retreats and whatnot. He's the only person I let read my work because I am so hypercritical of myself. I'm scared to share that messy first draft. But he reads all my messy first drafts and super communicative about the things I need to work on, the ideas he has. That's helped. And in person, I was very fortunate that I went to a festival called Y'all West, and I met Nick Stone, who is a New York Times bestselling author, for the first time. And I fanboyed. Her line was empty. Her sign line was empty. So I waited till then to fanboy, but I did. And she said, "Well, do you have your first book? Do you have your book with you?" I ran and got it, and she read it on the plane ride home. And then she did my first 3 book launches with me. She's been super helpful since then, and reading short stories and things like that. Same with Becky Albertalli, who I sent a fan letter to, and she, said, "Come on, let's go out for coffee." And since then, she has opened so many doors for me and is always inviting me to things. So yeah. I would say, it's not always a bad thing just to fan out over the writers that you love, because I think as writers, we love to hear that. And we love to see someone who's enthusiastic about the same journey that we're pursuing.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing there, the commonality between all of that is putting yourself out there. And that could very well not have anything to do with your writing specifically, much as it may have to do with making a connection with somebody that can help you on the way. Published writers, in my experience, are predominantly very eager to help other writers, even in small ways. And so taking that opportunity and getting out and being around writers and authors and being willing to talk about yourself, to talk about your work, to fan out. Yes, his praise is never going to hurt you, but definitely. And it's interesting. This feeds right into a section that I wanted to move into that is specific to going to conferences. And I know with Broadleaf, I always preach to writers who have never been to a conference, who are considering returning after a while, that there's nothing like walking in that building the first day and seeing a room or rooms full of people who share your dreams and share your failures and share your successes, and to be able to see that you are not alone in this journey. It's such a profound and important thing for you to experience. And I'm curious for all of you, in speaking to writers who have never been to a conference, who are, or with this pandemic haven't been in a while and are considering whether or not they should go back, what advice, what reason, what would you say to them about the importance of a conference? And Claudia, I'd like to begin with you.
Well, the first thing that I want to say is, you walk into that conference and there are all of these writers that, share your joys and your pains. But as a Black woman, I'm also saying, where's the other Black person in the room? Are there other Black people in the room? Are there teachers of color? Not just Black writers, teaching there. Is there a Latinx person? Is there an Asian person? Is there an Indian person? These are questions that come up that you might not think when you walk into a writer's conference. I'm sorry, I got so that was so important for me to say. I don't remember what the original question is.
And it was a very important thing to say. No, the question was just advice for writers considering going to a conference, or a reason why they should go or return to a conference after a while.
I think it's really important to find the conference that has the writers who write what you want to write. I do think if you are a person of color, that you should look for a conference that has people of color teaching, which will automatically draw other people of color. But yeah, really important to say, hey, I want to write this kind of book. So you really want somebody to speak to that. It doesn't have to be, only a children's book writing conference, but you definitely want that element there. And then the other classes you can definitely learn to form and apply to what you're trying to do as a writer. So go, and if you can't afford to go, ask if they have a scholarship. And if you can't go, see what kind of writer conferences are online. And again, ask for a scholarship, or if they have a scholarship, because there are so many people that want to write and they can't afford to pay $600 for a conference.
Julian?
I would say if it's something you're considering to do it, just as someone who has gone, not only as an attendee, but as someone who's been on panels and whatnot, I think that interaction is so important. I think hearing other people talk about craft and talk about the business side and learn those different things are valuable. I know that writing is an isolated process, so you're already in your head the whole time, but add on the pandemic and that extra isolation. Sometimes I think it's good to really burst out of that and kind of hear what else is going on, what other people are experiencing. I thought the burnout that I was feeling during the pandemic was solely me. I thought that being unable to be creative and all these different things was solely me. That when I got around other people, when I've been to retreats or conferences since then, it hasn't been just me. And I've built even more connections and been able to learn so much more. So I think they're very much worth it. I definitely agree with Claudia. If it's something you can't afford to do, I understand. When I came into the industry, I came in with a small indie press. I didn't have an advance. I didn't have any kind of money except for what I made in my day job. So I couldn't go to things. So yes, look to see if they have scholarships, look to see if they have open slots or different things that they're looking for. Even just volunteering so that you get to be a little piece of the conference is valuable. Don't feel like, okay, this is something that is not accessible to me, because it is very much accessible to you. I know a lot of different conferences now are doing the hybrid thing where they're doing in person, but they're also hosting virtual events, and those are free and you just sign up. So if it's baby steps you have to take, then take the baby steps. But I highly encourage it, if only just to get out of your own head and see the other aspects of the industry.
Deborah, what about you?
I would say to follow your instincts. You decide on the conference that you're going to go to because you love to read and you love to write. I was surprised, I think, when I first started going to realize that what I like to read wasn't necessarily what I was going to be good at writing. So in other words, it's like sometimes we read in a genre, we read a type of fiction or a type of nonfiction, and it's our thing. We love it, we love it, we love it. But then when we start writing, we understand that our voice works in a different way, and that's okay. Maybe what we're going to end up writing is like a narrative rather than poetry, you know? And I think that conferences are a great place to kind of explore all the different genres and to be open. If you go to conferences open-minded about what you might discover there, and bring a pen and paper and use it as a time when you're generating ideas, I would say don't be prescriptive about how many of the talks you have to attend. Give yourself time if you want to slip off to the side in a hallway after you hear something that's inspiring with your pen and paper to take some notes, or with however, if you do it on your phone, because I think that once you get into that energy, that creative energy of people at all levels of the field, from beginners to experts, you really do feel like a surge of energy, and your dream feels much more palpable. And you could probably generate something when you're there in the hotel room at night, or however it is you manage to go. I would echo what Julian said, that another nice thing is that part of conferences are always about craft, and the other part is also kind of the business side. There are usually panels where you can learn about how to go about navigating that treacherous business side that's always so scary to me. I love the creative, but the business side. In fact, I'm learning from the other panelists here. I said to take risks, and then I hear about them being vocal fans of other writers. And I thought that's something that I've been always very shy about doing. So I'm kind of thinking, oh, I should try to do that too. But don't make rules about how you have to participate. I tend to get overwhelmed very easily, and I always mark all the panels I want to go see, and then I figure out that I can't keep up the pace, and I think that's okay too.
Sarah, what about you?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's been so much great advice, so I will keep it short. I would say my advice for going to a conference is to go in without a lot of set expectations. I've certainly known fellow writers to maybe go into a conference, like especially the first time, maybe having a lot of hanging hopes and dreams on, say, finding an agent at a conference. But keeping an open mind instead, and not necessarily clinging to such set expectations, is really great, because you might make a connection that surprises you, or that becomes important down the line. For instance, I met the person who, and just befriended her, who later became the editor of my debut novel. And that was, 2 years later that happened. It's not like I had that manuscript in hand at the time. It was just a lovely person I met. And then when we started working together, we actually had a foundation of, oh, we've met, we know each other a little bit, this will be great. And so, you never know, like, what you take away from a conference, like how that will manifest itself later down the line for you. So just go in with a really open mind, and I think that's the best way to approach it.
Yeah, excellent. A couple of questions that we have from attendees regarding conferences. When moving to a new area, what are your suggestions for finding workshops and conferences? And then on top of that, should I stay in state only with workshops and conferences? And we'll throw it to, Deborah, I'm gonna put you on the spot on that one.
I think, Twitter, libraries, NPR, your local NPR, they usually announce and advertise the nonprofits that are doing things. I would start close to home. I think even when you reach a place where you're publishing, your local regional community, they're the ones that are going to have your back. I mean, I love remote learning, I do. But I think also that there is something that can't be replaced in those physical interactions. As soon as you start connecting with people who also have a dream of becoming writers, you can do all the things that feed and inspire you as a writer, which for me isn't just being at the desk. It's telling stories around the dinner table with friends. It is reading books out loud on a car trip. It is maybe reading aloud to the elderly or to children, anything that sweeps you up into language. And that's going to happen with other people. If you are doing remote conferences, I always hope that the organizers, if you're in a workshop, that they allow for breakout rooms, because that's a smaller group where you can kind of interact with people. There's just 2 or 3 or 4 of you. Look for those sort of things. I think anything that gives you the ability to interact with people, either physically in a present situation or in a situation where they're going to help you facilitate more one-on-one conversations in the workshop that you've signed up for. Just Google your area, and there are plenty. I know, like in Minneapolis, there's the Loft, and in Seattle, there's Hugo House, and you have your community colleges. Here in Santa Fe, we have the Santa Fe Community College that has great classes. So there's a lot of there. You can find opportunities if you look.
The next attendee question I have on that one is, how do you build a perpetual community beyond brief attendance at a conference? So obviously the question is just about, what do you do after you get to a conference? How do you build that community afterward? And is there anybody who would love to take that one on? Because I would highly recommend, first and foremost, that as you're in, especially with the way things are today, is that as you are going about the conference and making these connections, that you're finding out what social platforms people are on that you meet, and connecting with them, and starting interactions, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, it doesn't really matter. Liking TikTok videos, whatever it happens to be, is that you interact with one another. And that's, as simple as that is, it builds the foundation. You have to, it's like planting something, you have to give it time to grow, but you have to actually put in the work for it.
I want to echo what Julian said earlier. Hit that bookstore. Writers are readers. And bookstores usually have some kind of board that will tell you what event is going to be happening, or they'll have a mailing list where you can get the information. And of course, as you said, social media is a great place to find out what your favorite writers are doing. And of course, like I said earlier, those literary nonprofits in town, they are often hosting events.
I would also say, don't be afraid to head up a writing group yourself. I mean, I mentioned that I first joined one with some neighbors. We just came together, and we shared what we had written. And then once you're able to find people that you're doing that with, I would say to listen carefully, care for their stories, and don't kill works that are just emerging. The rigor will come later. Start by asking questions about what they intended. And naturally, some people will fall away and it'll grow and people will hear about it. And you can be the center of creating something as well.
Very true. All right, so we have probably about 15 minutes or so left, and I've got one question here from an attendee. I'm going to go, and then I'm going to scroll through the Q&A and see what you all have. This one is regarding critique groups, and the question is just very succinctly, why do these fail? And I don't know if any of you have had personal experience with critique groups and why they have failed or why they have succeeded. I know in my experience with the critique groups that have not succeeded, it has been strictly due to the engagement of the people in the group, and whether or not they're offering material, or whether or not they're offering constructive criticism rather than just harsh criticism. I think in my experience, most of the time they fail because people are a little too heavy-handed. Not that you shouldn't have real criticism, just that there's a gentle way to go about it, because we all get slapped enough in this business.
Yeah, at Spalding University, where I got my MFA, a core value was critiquing with compassion. And so I brought that on to my own teaching in any workshop or critique group that I might participate in. What we did was we said something nice about, the work first, even if the only nice thing about it you can say was, "Ooh, I liked how you use that Times New Roman font." But, find something kind to say. And then when you offer your critique, approach the person the way you would want to be approached. Be compassionate. You're not trying to beat someone down. You're trying to just give a little feedback. And I mean, who says your feedback is so important that you have to beat people up with it? So I would just say, if you're not finding that kind of compassion in your critique group and it feels toxic and hurtful, examine whether you're feeling too sensitive or if this group is just too much. And the last thing I want to say is just sometimes people stop coming.
Anybody else have anything to add to that one?
I would just
Okay,
add.
Oh, Sarah. Okay. No, Sarah, go first, and then
Right.
Deborah said she had some.
Okay, perfect. I was just going to add, and this may or may not be part of it, but something that I've found can really kill the joy in any writing group or critique group is comparison. So I just wanted to chime in and give that great advice of like, head down, eyes on your own paper, because that I would lose my mind if I did anything else. And I have always approached my work that way. Comparing, with the people that you're critiquing for as they start getting, I don't know, awards or one of them gets an agent, comparing yourself and where you're at in your own journey is going to build up resentment and definitely cause those groups to fail. So that's another little attitude piece to approach them with.
And Deborah?
Yeah, I think when you come into a critique group, everyone should have a talk the night before you start about what your expectations and what the ground rules are. Something that I always like to remind myself and my students is that about 50% of the feedback you receive, you can just go ahead and throw it away because they're not really getting what you're going for, and that's okay. They're trying. Another portion of it, though, is going to feel very valuable to you. And sometimes as a teacher, it's my work that they might throw out. They might not like the feedback that I'm giving them, and that's fine, because what we're trying to do is imagine something that is not full or finished or has not found its form yet, And I think that's where the problem comes from a lot of times, is in that sort of unformed state. How are we going to deal with it? Does the writer want us to help them imagine what it might become, or will that be offensive to them? Is it a think tank that we're having where we're going to say, well, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? Or what about this? Or is it more that they just want us to respond to what they've put on the page? And they don't want any imagining involved. I think when you establish that as sort of a ground rule, there are less hurt feelings. And the last thing I would say, that if you're working in adult literature, in particular, creative nonfiction, you have to remember that the person who's workshopping sometimes has a hard time separating the criticism that they hear about the work. They're just identify with it so closely. And on the opposite end, I think sometimes it can be uncomfortable when we see someone who's writing about a trauma, say, and it feels like it hasn't found its full form. It makes us feel like we might be complicit in the wounding because they're still figuring things out. I always think, what I have to do is I have to respect the professional decision on the part of the writer that they are ready to handle this material. What I'm feeling is unshaped or unformed is just the structure. It doesn't imply that they haven't dealt with it emotionally. That's condescending for me to behave that way towards somebody. So when somebody brings something to workshop that has a tough scene or whatever, I try not to conflate it with where they are in relation to that scene at all. I think that's something that kills workshops quite often.
We have 10 minutes left, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about conferences and where to find conferences. There are plenty of resources, not the least of which is just straight up Google. just looking for writing conferences, but a few options that you can look up. Shaw Guides does a really great compilation of writing conferences throughout the country. And Poet and Writers has a list of conferences that you can check. And I know Writer's Guide does quite a bit too. There are a number of resources online for finding conferences, whether they're in your area or not. And if you can go outside of your area, then it's definitely great to look into as many as you can. Okay, digging through the questions here. How do you address multiple genre writing communities whose interests and styles are different and sometimes not relating to the differences? Because that's a tough question. I would understand it a little bit better, but I think if I were to interpret from it is, how do you address like writing communities that have multiple genres and interests and styles are different from your own, I guess is what I'm saying. I think we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, and the importance of going to groups and conferences and programs that address a wide variety of genre and interests in writing, so that you can learn from many others. I know I set out to be a fantasy / middle grade YA writer, and in my most recent book was literary fiction, and that's because of going to, whether it was my own or other conferences, where there's this wide berth of genres and styles and people to talk to and to share ideas with, especially ideas you have not written yet. Let's see. There's a lot of rah-rahs and thank yous. And some thanks to Deborah for mentioning that age is not relevant in writing, and being older gives even beginning writers a wealth of life experiences. And thank you for reminding us that age doesn't hinder writing ability. In a book, no one knows your age.
Yeah, Zach, I would say really quick about the multiple genres in a workshop. There have been quite a few books written in the last 4 or 5 years that are about decolonizing workshop, giving the writer the ability to speak and kind of direct the workshop. One idea, if you find yourself in a group of like a lyric essayist and a poet and a young adult, is that they bring a model of something that they are seeing their piece in conversation with, and they do a little bit of an educational 10 minutes, like, this is what I see as a lyric essay, read a page of this, read an excerpt of this, kind of explain the genre to the others, so that there's a teaching opportunity, there's a learning opportunity, and then the workshop happens with the author directing the conversation rather than being quiet. That's an idea.
I'd like to add that we always want to learn from other genres and value what they're doing. If you write fantasy, value what the poet is doing and what the poet has to teach you, and then value your own work and what you can share and what you have to teach as well.
Interesting question here, and see if anybody wants to take it on regarding critique groups and whether or not one should sign some type of non-disclosure agreement with your critique members, not to share information about the projects that you're talking about. I don't know how anybody feels about that. I've never been in that situation before. I certainly like to think that if I'm going to get into a group with people, that it needs to be in a circle of trust, a foundation of trust with the individuals, that you're not going to need that. I've actually never been asked that question before. So hopefully you find people that you can trust would be my advice.
I think if someone had given me a non-disclosure statement, I would be like, wait a minute, what are we going to be talking about in here? Because that's pretty deep right there. I would immediately question why this is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like in any writing group I've been part of, I've tended to find, and obviously there are exceptions, but that most writers are most excited about their own ideas and they're not out to take yours. They want their words published because they're excited about what they've created. So just my 2 cents.
Well, we have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask for Claudia and Deborah specifically, for the writers who want to be more involved in your community or even for other communities. What opportunities are offered through specifically your organizations? But what advice would you give to writers looking for resources?
At the Carnegie Center, we offer language and writing classes. So Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative members, of course, there's no cost for them to join us. All they have to do is let us know they want to be a part, and we'll put them in, and then they can immediately start registering for classes. We also, last year for our Carnegie Center Books in Progress conference, they got 100% discount for coming to the conference, which I think is just a little under $200. But there's not a lot of groups like that. So you might have to start one. You might have to approach the director of an agency and say, hey, what can we do to decolonize this space and this program? And the same with not just directors of nonprofits, literary nonprofits at the bookstore, if they're having events, hey, can we have an event for our group of people? I really, really strongly recommend you find out who in your literary community is doing the work of anti-racism. And some places are very vocal about that. The Carnegie Center has a Black Lives Matter statement. A lot of places, they want to open up to people of color, but people of color aren't going and saying, hey, we want to do this, because a lot of times we're just erased from the whole equation. So that's what I would recommend.
So our website, iaia.com, if you go to the MFA page, we have some recordings, Vimeo recordings that have been posted that are craft talks by some of our mentors. So, well-known Native authors in the field who have given talks to our students during the pandemic, they were recorded. Now that we're going back to in-person, I don't know how many more we will be recording, but we also have, there are many events that happen at IA that are streamed in all art fields. But specifically for the writing, if you go to iaia.com and then go to the page for the MFA Creative Writing Program, you'll find some material there. The other thing is that we have a residency only option for our MFA program, which is basically held in January and in July. So we have students who come in to actually apply for an MFA, and they are working with a mentor one-on-one, but they come out to Santa Fe in January and July for kind of a large group get-together where we have Lannan visiting writers from the Lannan Foundation, and we have some of our mentors, and there's a lot going on. You can actually apply to that without being a full-time student that is going to do the full mentorship. And you basically have to submit a writing sample. I have 3 applicants for the one coming up in July, and the deadline has passed now, but for next year it would be possible for the July residency only. And then I would also just say that, we have screenwriting, we have poetry, we have nonfiction, and we have fiction. And we're the least expensive low residency MFA program in the country. The screenwriting program often does not get enough applicants. We have a Warner scholarship from Warner Brothers that some years it's actually hard to give away because we just don't have enough people applying. So, you know, there are a lot of low residency MFA programs, and I would encourage you to Google them and look around and compare them if you're getting serious about writing. Otherwise, you know, you can find online events. I know McDowell has them. Hedgebrook has a lot of them. Look at the writers residency programs. A lot of times they have free viewing of events and readings. So do literary magazines.
We're out of time just about here. A couple of things real quick, though. I want to leave with a question for Julian and Sarah. But before I do that, I want to drop into the chat all of the pertinent websites to the organizations mentioned here, to our individual websites and everything to that effect. And so I'm going to drop those in the chat now, but also those are going to be included in a follow-up email coming from the Authors Guild so that you will be able to research these individuals and organizations a little bit more. And I highly recommend that you find a writing organization in your area or even close to your area that you can associate with, become a member, become involved, you know, go to events at bookstores, go to events with your writing organization, begin to build your community or become part of one that exists. So let me put those in here. And then while I'm doing that, Julian and Sarah, you're both very, very familiar with the idea of an elevator pitch. I don't have to school you on that, but what I want to do is have you give the elevator pitch to a writer, a form of advice on what you would say they should do as writers. What is your advice that they should do the most? Yeah. Sarah, let's start with you. You look the least shocked by that question,
okay.
so I'm going to give that one to you.
Honestly processing, but here I'll just writers, and you're talking about people who are aspiring.
A general bit of advice. I want to be a writer. What do I do?
You want to be a writer? What do you do? Okay, what you do is you critique. You critique for as many people as are willing to critique with you, and you critique, as we touched on earlier, widely across genres. You write YA fantasy? Critique some women's fiction. You are going to learn so much about what works for you and for your own style. You are going to learn new ways of writing, new styles. You're going to learn new ways of thinking and ways to approach things. And you are going to come back with a clear vision for your own work and the ability to be a much better editor for yourself. It's going to teach you to think critically about all sorts of writing. Critique.
Julian.
Petrified because you said elevator pitch, and my pitches are like walking up 10 flights of stairs. Like I can't wrap that up. What I will say is to read widely also. And that is consuming as much as you can throughout all different genres, all different categories and whatnot. I think that's helped me out tremendously. It's just opening myself to things I wouldn't even read. Things I'm terrified. I get terrified to read. I pick up and I read because there's something I can learn about storytelling from that. And the other thing that I would suggest is to be unafraid. And when I say be unafraid, it sounds very easy, but what I mean by be unafraid is go in knowing that your voice matters, that what you're trying to do is going to change someone's life. That's what helped me tremendously through all of the struggles of writing my first novel. Was I have a story that I uniquely want to tell and impact lives. And that's kind of how you have to go in it. And that's with everything that you get, because you're going to get harsh critiques and you're going to get rough reviews and you're going to get people who just didn't get what you were aiming for. But you being unafraid to tell the story that lives inside of you is going to keep you going on this very long but also very fruitful journey.
Excellent. I'm making a slight amendment here to the IAIA website. My copy and paste did not get that correct, so my apologies for that. But again, these links will be included in a follow-up email. I would like to thank everyone who has been here in attendance. I most definitely would like to thank my fellow panelists who have burned their mental energy on these questions and done a fantastic job. It's been great to share the screen with you, and I hope to be able to work with you all again in the future. Thank you to the Authors Guild for giving us an opportunity to have this conversation. And I do highly recommend you all explore the Authors Guild and everything that it has to offer. It is a fantastic organization. And I know, speaking on behalf of Broadleaf Writers, we're thrilled to have a partnership with them. and to do future programs with them as well. Thank you very much, Johnny.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach, Deborah, Sarah, Claudia, and Julian. This has been great. We love what you do, and the Authors Guild. We stay hands off from craft talk. We stick to the business of writing. So it's really great to get feedback from writing groups about what we should include in our programming. So we thank you for that, and we hope this was helpful for everyone. It definitely was. Thank you all so much, and with that, we'll wrap up.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a nice day.